Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Keika. We'll be going over textbooks chapter by chapter, section by section. Last video we went over concept 1.1 and this video we'll be going over concept 1.2 of chapter 1. So let's get started. Concept 1.2, the core theme. Evolution accounts for the unity and diversity of life. Evolution. An understanding of evolution helps us to make sense of everything we know about life on Earth. As the fossil record clearly shows, life has been evolving for billions of years, resulting in a vast diversity of past and present organisms. But along with the diversity, there is also unity, in the form of shared features. For example, while seahorses, jackrabbits, hummingbirds, and giraffes all look very different, their skeletons are organized in the same basic way. The scientific explanation for the unity and diversity of organisms is evolution, a process of biological change in which species accumulate differences from their ancestors as they adapt to different environments over time. Thus, we can account for differences between two species, diversity, with the idea that certain heritable changes occurred after the two species diverged from their common ancestor. However, they also share certain traits, unity, simply because they have descended from a common ancestor. An abundance of evidence of different types supports the occurrence of evolution and the mechanisms that describe how it takes place, which we'll explore in detail in chapters 22 through 25. To quote one of the founders of modern evolutionary theory, Theodosius Dobzhansky, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." To understand this statement, we need to examine how biologists think about the vast diversity of life on the planet. Okay, so in my notes here I wrote that fossil records show that life has been evolving for billions of years, resulting in diversity of past and present organisms. While there is diversity, there is also unity and shared features. Bone organization is similar between organisms. Evolution is the scientific explanation for the unity and diversity of organisms, a process of biological change in which species accumulate differences from their ancestors as they adapt to different environments over time. And organisms that diverge from their common ancestor, diversity, have also descended from a common ancestor, unity. And Theodosius Dobzhansky is one of the founders of the theory evolution. Classifying the diversity of life. And I'm just going to scroll up for you guys. Diversity is the hallmark of life. Biologists have so far identified and named about 1.8 million species of organisms. Each species is given a two-part name. The first part of the name is the genus, to which the species belongs, and the second part is unique to the species within the genus. For example, Homo sapiens is the name of our species. To date, known species include at least 100,000 species of fungi, 290,000 plant species, 57,000 vertebrate species, animals with backbones, and 1 million insect species, more than half of all known forms of life. Not to mention the myriad types of single-cell organisms. Researchers identify thousands of additional species each year. Estimates of the total number of species range from about 10 million to over 100 million. Whatever the number, the enormous variety of life gives biology a very broad scope. Biologists face a major challenge in attempting to make sense of this variety. So here I wrote diversity is the hallmark of life. Species have a two-part name, the genus name of the species plus the unique part. So Homo is the genus name, and then sapiens is the unique part. An enormous variety of life gives biology a very broad scope. The three domains of life. Humans tend to group diverse items according to their similarities and relationships to each other. Consequently, biologists have long used careful comparisons of structure, function, and other obvious features to classify forms of life into groups. In the last few decades, new methods of assessing species relationships, such as comparisons of DNA sequences, have led to re-evaluation of the classification of life. Although this re-evaluation is going, biologists currently place all organisms into 3 groups called domains: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. So here we're going to look at this figure 1.13. We have a domain bacteria right over here, domain archaea, and domain eukarya, which is split into 4 different groups, which are plantae, fungi, animalia, and protists. And some people might be confused with protists because it looks like a bacteria. But we're just going to read real quick right here. So protists are mostly unicellular eukaryotes and some relatively simple multicellular relatives. Pictured here is an assortment of protists inhabiting pond water. Scientists are currently debating how to classify protists in a way that accurately reflects their evolutionary relationships. Okay, so this is kind of a gray area type thing, just for our knowledge. 2 of the 3 domains, bacteria and archaea, consist of single-cell prokaryotic organisms. All the eukaryotes, organisms with eukaryotic cells, are in domain eukarya. This domain includes 4 subgroups: kingdom plantae, kingdom fungi, kingdom animalia, and the protists. The 3 kingdoms are distinguished partly by their modes of nutrition. Plants produce their own sugars and other food molecules by photosynthesis. Fungi absorbs nutrients in dissolved form from their surroundings, and animals obtain food by eating and digesting other organisms. Animalia is, of course, the kingdom to which we belong. The numerous and diverse eukaryotes are the protists, which are mostly single-celled organisms. Although protists were once placed in the single kingdom, they are now classified in several groups. One major reason for this change is the recent DNA evidence showing that some protists are less closely related to other protists than they are to plants, animals, or... One major reason for this change is the recent DNA evidence showing that some protists are less closely related to other protists than they are to plants, fungi, or animals. Okay? So I should probably add to this section a little bit. Diversity. Classifying the diversity of life. Oh no, we went over that. We are going over the 3 domains of life. So bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Single-cell prokaryotes, archaea, single-cell prokaryotes that live in extreme environments. Eukarya, multi-cell, plantae, fungi, animalia, and protists. Protists used to be in their own kingdom, but recent research has shown that there are some protists that are more closely related to plants, animals, and fungi than other protists. Okay? And then the 3 domains of life are characterized by their modes of nutrition. Okay. Unity in the diversity of life. As diverse as life is, there is also remarkable unity among forms of life. Consider, for example, the similar skeletons of different animals and the genetic and the universal genetic language of DNA, the genetic code, both mentioned earlier. In fact, similarities between organisms are evident at all levels of the biological hierarchy. For example, unity is obvious in many features of cell structure, even among distantly related organisms. How can we account for life's dual nature of unity and diversity? The process of evolution, explained next, illuminates both the similarities and differences in the world of life. It also introduces another important dimension of biology, the passage of time. The history of life, as documented by fossils and other evidence, is the saga of ever-changing Earth billions of years old, inhabited by an evolving cast of living forms. So for unity and the diversity of life, I wrote similar skeletons of different animals, universal genetic language of DNA, and cell structure. For example, cilia can be found in both paramecium, pond water, and humans. The function and structure are the same. So cilia is here. Cilia is like a hair. Think of just like hair that covers a species, but it's used for moving. So the fact that it can be found in pond water and within our windpipes just shows that there's a unity there in structure and function. Although the organisms are so different, the function and the structure are the same. Charles Darwin and the theory of natural selection. An evolutionary view of life came into sharp focus in November 1859 when Charles Darwin published one of the most important and influential books ever written, on the origin of species by means of natural selection. The origin of species articulated two main points. The first point was that, as species adapt to different environments over time, they accumulate differences from their ancestors. Darwin called this process descent with modification. This insightful phrase captured the duality of life's unity and diversity. Unity in the kingship among species that descended from common ancestors, and diversity in the modifications that evolved as species branched from their common ancestors. Darwin's second main point was his proposal that natural selection is a primary cause of descent with modification. So here he is, Charles Darwin, in his book. In birds, unity and diversity within birds. And another way you can think about unity and diversity is like just a very simplified form would be like siblings. You came from the same parents, but you're both very different. But in a way you're the same because you're from the same family. So kind of like that. Darwin developed his theory of natural selection from observations that by themselves were neither new nor profound. However, although others had described the pieces of the puzzle, it was Darwin who saw how they fit together. He started with the following three observations from nature. First, individuals in a population vary in their traits, many of which seem to be heritable, passed on from parents to offspring. Second, a population can produce far more offspring that can survive to produce offspring of their own. With more individuals than the environment is able to support, competition is inevitable. Third, species generally are suited to their environments. In other words, they are adapted to their circumstances. For instance, a common adaptation among birds that eat hard seeds is an especially strong beak. By making inferences from these three observations, Darwin developed a scientific explanation for how evolution occurs. He reasoned that individuals with inherited traits that are better suited to the local environment are more likely to survive and reproduce than less suited individuals. Over many generations, a higher and higher proportion of individuals in a population will have the advantageous traits. Evolution occurs as the unequal reproductive success of individuals ultimately leads to adaptation into their environment, as long as the environment stays the same. Darwin called this mechanism of evolutionary adaptation natural selection because the natural environment consistently selects for the propagation of certain traits among naturally occurring variant traits in the population. The example in Figure 118 illustrates the ability of natural selection to edit an insect population The example in Figure 1.18 illustrates the ability of the natural selection to edit an insect's population's heritable variations in coloration. We see the products of natural selection in the exquisite adaptations of various organisms to their special circumstances of their way of life in their environment. The wings of a bat shown in Figure 119 are an excellent example of adaptation. So just to go over this, population with varied inherited traits, elimination of individuals with certain traits that make them more visible, reproduction of survivors, and increased frequency of traits that enhance survival and reproductive success. In evolutionary adaptation, bats, the only mammals capable of active flight, have wings with webbings between the extended fingers. Darwin proposed that such adaptations are refined over time by natural selection. Okay, so now we're just going to go over my notes. I wrote here, Charles Darwin and the Theory of Natural Selection. November 1859, on the origin of species by natural selection. As species adapt to different environments over time, they accumulate differences from their ancestors, descent with modification. Natural selection is a primary cause of descent with modification. Darwin saw how observations fit together. The three observations of nature are that individuals in a population vary in traits. As the population produces offspring, competition is inevitable. And third, species are suited to their environment / adapted to their circumstances. Conclusion. Darwin reasoned that individuals are better suited for the environment. Conclusion. Darwin reasoned that individuals that are better suited for the environment are more likely to survive and reproduce. So natural selection is when nature selects for certain traits in the population. Okay, and now we're going to go to Tree of Life. Take another look at the skeletal architecture of the bat's wings in Figure 119. These wings are not like those of feathered birds. The bat is a mammal. The bones, joints, nerves, and blood vessels in the bat's forelimb, though adapted for flight, are very similar to those in the human arm, the foreleg of a horse, and the flipper of a whale. Indeed, all mammalian forelimbs are anatomical variations of a common architecture. According to the Darwinian concept of descent with modification, the shared anatomy of mammalian limbs reflects inheritance of the limb structure from a common ancestor, the prototype mammal, from which all other mammals have descended. The diversity of mammalian forelimbs results from modification by natural selection operating over millions of years in different environmental contexts. Fossils and other evidence corroborate anatomical unity in supporting this view of mammalian descent from a common ancestor. Darwin proposed that natural selection, by its cumulative effects over long periods of time, could cause an ancestral species to give rise to two or more descendant species. This could occur, for example, if one population of organisms becomes fragmented into several subpopulations isolated in different environments. In these separate arenas of natural selection, One species could generally radiate into multiple species as geographically isolated populations adapted over many generations to different environmental conditions. The Galapagos finches are a famous example of the process of radiation of a new species from a common ancestor. Darwin collected specimens of these birds during his 1835 visit to the remote Galapagos Islands, 900 kilometers off the Pacific coast of South America. These relatively young volcanic islands are home to many species of plants and animals found nowhere else in the world, though many Galapagos organisms are clearly related to the species on the South American mainland. The Galapagos finches are thought to have descended from an ancestral finch species that reached the archipelago from South America or the Caribbean. Over time, the Galapagos finches diversified from their ancestor as populations became adapted to different food sources on their particular islands. Years after Darwin collected the finches, researchers began to sort out their evolutionary relationships, first from the anatomical and geographical data, and more recently with the help of DNA sequence comparisons. Biologists' diagrams of evolutionary relationships generally take a tree-like form, though the trees are often turned sideways, as in figure 120. Tree diagrams make sense. Just as an individual has a genealogy that can be diagrammed as a family tree, each species is one twig of a branching tree of life, extending back in time, though ancestral species more and more remote. Through ancestral species more and more remote. Species that are very similar, such as the Galapagos finches, share a relatively recent common ancestor. Through an ancestor that lived much further back in time, finches are related to sparrows, hawks, penguins, and all other birds. Furthermore, finches and other birds are related to us through a common ancestor even more ancient. Trace life back far enough, and we reach the early prokaryotes that inhabited Earth over 3.5 billion years ago. We can recognize their vestiges in our own cells, in the universal genetic code, for example. Indeed, all of life is connected through its long evolutionary history. So this is the chart that we described earlier. So we have the ancestral finch, the original finch, I guess you could say. And from the original finch, they branched off into different variants of the original finch. Like a family tree, sideways. And that is it for concept 1.2. And we're going to go over the last of my notes here. According to the Darwinian concept of descent with modification, the shared anatomy of mammalian limbs reflects inheritance of the limb structure from a common ancestor, the prototype mammal, from which all other mammals descended. The diversity of mammalian forelimbs results from modification by natural selection operating over millions of years in different environmental contexts. Darwin theorized that natural selection could cause an ancestral species to give rise to two or more descendant species, if a species is fragmented into different environments. Biologists use tree-like diagrams to illustrate evolutionary relationships which can be traced further and further back in time. Okay, so that's it for this video, you guys. Thank you for coming back. I hope this helps you, and good luck with your studies, okay? I'll see you guys next time. Bye.